Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the Russian economy, and specifically to talk about natural gas. Russia has the largest natural gas supplies out of any country in the world by a significant margin. It actually has around 5 times as much as the USA. However, because of what's happened in Ukraine and the fact that Europe has now turned its back on Russia, Russia is no longer the world's largest exporter of gas products, and it's now having to turn to liquefied natural gas to try to monetize all of its reserves. But unfortunately, because of the sanctions that are being applied against a variety of Russian companies, including those that are now involved in liquefied natural gas projects, Russia is struggling to be able to find business partners and buyers for its natural gas products. So in today's video, we'll go through the details on which countries have the most natural gas and which are producing the most, because Russia is not the world's top producer. We'll also have a look at the statistics for liquefied natural gas, because unfortunately, from Russia's point of view, they've lagged behind the rest of the world in terms of developing their LNG capacity, predominantly because they were able to pipe a lot of gas directly to Europe, which is a very low cost of transmission, and therefore they were happy sitting back, taking the cash from those sales rather than investing into LNG facilities. We'll then talk about what's going on with the latest development that Russia has been working on, which is called Arctic LNG. And for that development, they took on board business partners from France, Japan, and China. But unfortunately, because of the sanctions, those business partners are now becoming very worried about the project, and it looks like it's now in jeopardy. So I'll go through the details as to what's happening with that. We'll also talk about the fact that that project relies upon icebreakers. So these are huge gas tankers that can break through ice that's up to 2 meters thick, so around 6 foot thick. And unfortunately, from Russia's point of view, they don't have enough of these icebreakers to be able to service their LNG facilities. And that's now causing them major problems. We'll also talk about what's going on with Russia's revenues, because that's the bottom line here. Russia has lost over $100 billion per year of income from its natural gas sales, and it's now starting to lose LNG sales. So I'll go through the details of that and talk about the impact on the Russian economy is. And then finally today, I'll wrap up with my summary. So what I think is going on right now with regards to Russia's gas supplies, what's likely to happen over the next 3 to 6 months, and what the impact of all of that will be on the Russian economy. But before we get started on all of that, I'd like to say once again, thank you so much to everybody that supported me through the nightmare hacking experience that I had recently. At that point in time, I genuinely thought it was game over for Joe Blogs and that the world was closing in on me. But the messages of support and all of the generosity that I received really helped to boost my motivation to make sure that I got the channel back, which I've now done, obviously, because this video is on it. I'd like to say thank you so much to everybody that bought me a coffee, sent me a YouTube super thanks, joined up as a patron, increased their membership as a patron, signed up as a YouTube member or a Buy Me a Coffee member. I really, really appreciate all of your support. It helps keep me motivated and it really makes me focus on getting videos done for the channel. So thank you so much. Prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, natural gas provided it with its second largest form of income after oil. Natural gas is a fossil fuel that is formed when layers of organic matter decompose under anaerobic conditions and are subjected to intense heat and pressure underground over millions of years. The energy that the decayed organisms originally obtained from the sun via photosynthesis is stored as chemical energy within the molecules of methane and other hydrocarbons. Natural gas can be burned for heating, cooking, and electricity generation. It is also used as a chemical feedstock in the manufacture of plastics and other commercially important organic chemicals, including fertilizers. This chart shows the global uses of natural gas, so tells us why people want to use it. And as you can see, the biggest single use of natural gas globally is the generation of electricity, which represents around 36% of total demand. Natural gas is used as a fuel in these power stations to heat water and generate steam. That steam turns turbines and therefore produces electricity. The second biggest use globally is industrial uses. So this is used in a variety of different situations to provide heat that's needed for various industrial processes. And that represents around 31% of all of the global supply. Residential demand is the third biggest use, representing around 15% of total global purchases. Commercial demand represents around 10%, and the final 8% is split equally between transportation and pipelines and distribution. This chart shows the top 10 countries in terms of natural gas reserves in the world. And as you can see, Russia is right at the top of this chart and currently has around 24% of the total reserves that have been identified globally. Number 2 on the list is Iran with around 17%, followed by Qatar with 13%, the United States, which has just over 5%, Saudi Arabia 4%, Turkmenistan just under 4%, the United Arab Emirates is number 7 with 3%, followed by Venezuela, Nigeria, and 10th on the list is China with just under 2.5%. Now, interestingly, this chart shows the countries that are producing the most natural gas. So basically taking the gas that's stored under the ground and actually producing it in a usable format. And as you can see, despite only having around 5% of the global supply, compared with 24% for Russia, the United States is actually the world's largest producer of natural gas and is producing around 50% more natural gas than Russia. Russia is number 2 in terms of world production, followed by Iran, who are the second largest in terms of reserves. And interestingly, Canada, which didn't feature in the top 10 in terms of its total reserves, is the world's 4th largest producer of natural gas, followed by Algeria, Qatar, Norway, China, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. And this chart shows the countries that are consuming the most natural gas. And as you can see, the United States is right at the top of this list, consuming almost 22% of the global consumption of natural gas, compared with its 5% of reserves. And when you look at the total consumption figure in the USA of around 27.2 million cubic feet per year, that's around 5.5 million cubic feet less than the USA is producing. So the USA is still a net exporter of natural gas. However, if you look at the figures for Russia, which is the world's second largest consumer, it's consuming around 15.5 million cubic feet, compared with its production figure of around 22.7 million cubic feet. So Russia is therefore exporting significantly more natural gas than the USA because it's not consuming as much. China is the world's 3rd largest consumer of natural gas and is actually consuming around 50% more than it's producing, so China is a net importer of natural gas. Iran is number 4 on the list, followed by Japan, Canada, Saudi Arabia, Germany, Mexico, and the UAE. And Germany is a country of note here because it's consuming a lot of natural gas, and because it doesn't have its own supplies, historically it was buying huge quantities directly from Russia via the Nord Stream pipelines. However, as you'll be aware if you follow the channel, those pipelines were blown up mysteriously. We still don't have the answer as to who was behind that sabotage, and Germany has now changed its supply chain and is no longer buying vast quantities directly from Russia. And this map really highlights the problems that Russia is facing right now, because over the last 30 years or so, Russia has constructed significant pipelines that were designed to deliver pipeline gas directly to all of the consumers in Europe that wanted to buy it. By far the largest of all of the pipelines was the Nord Stream pipeline that was delivering around 55 billion cubic meters of gas directly to Germany every year. The second largest pipelines are those that pass through Ukraine, that were previously delivering around 40 billion cubic meters of gas. The third largest is the Yamal pipeline, which goes all the way from the Yamal gas fields, which are located in the heart of Russia, all the way through into Europe. The third largest pipeline in terms of capacity, delivering around 33 billion cubic meters per year, was the Yamal pipeline, but it's actually the longest in terms of the distance that it travels. It goes from the heart of Russia, where the Yamal gas fields are located, all the way through into the middle of Europe. The fourth largest is the Turk Stream pipeline that delivers gas into Turkey for onward transmission into Europe and delivers around 32 billion cubic meters per year. And the fifth largest is the Blue Stream, which also delivers gas into Turkey and delivers around 16 billion cubic meters. And this map shows some of the local infrastructure that's been built within Europe that was designed to take the Russian gas and deliver it to all of the points where countries needed it to go to. This chart shows the daily income that Russia has been earning from the sale of its fossil fuel products dating back to the start of 2022, which was the month before the invasion of Ukraine started. And the colour coding we've got here represent 5 different types of fuel. The dark purple section at the bottom represents revenue from crude oil. The lighter purple section represents the sale of oil products such as gasoline and diesel. The brown section above that represents the sale of pipeline gas. The blue section represents revenue from coal, and the orange section at the top represents income from liquefied natural gas, which is natural gas which has been converted under pressure into a liquid and then exported using ships. And the 2 sections of this chart that I really want to focus in on are the sale of pipeline gas and liquefied natural gas. So the 2 browny orangey sections towards the top. And what this chart shows is that in January 2022, Russia was earning around 263 million euros, which equates to around $290 million, from the sale of pipeline gas every single day, which means on an annualized basis, if you times that number by 365 to represent the number of days in a year, Russia was earning at that point before the war started around $106 billion every year from the sale of pipeline gas. Now, interestingly, following the invasion of Ukraine, because we saw a huge spike in the price of gas, Russia's revenue actually increased. And at one point in April 22, Russia was earning around 400 million euros, which equates to around $440 million per day. So on an annualized basis at that point, Russia's income had actually increased to around $158 billion. However, if you look at what's happened over the last 2 years, you can see that there has been a significant reduction in the amount of revenue that Russia has earned from pipeline gas, from natural gas sales. And today, Russia's sales equate to around 68 million euros per day, which is around $75 million. So on an annualized basis, Russia is currently earning around $27 billion, which equates to more than 100 billion before the war started and a peak of around 158 billion. So overall, Russia has lost more than $100 billion worth of income as a result of its invasion of Ukraine. And of course, the reason for that is that all of the countries who were previously taking that gas that was being supplied by the pipelines that we looked at earlier have turned their back on Russia and said, we no longer want it. It may be cheaper than the alternative options, but we're prepared to pay a higher price as a result of what's happening in Ukraine. The main driver why the sanctions have been put into place have been to cause economic pain for Russia so that the war in Ukraine stops. Now, one of the problems that Russia has faced over the last 2 years is that it's very difficult to be able to pivot when you're talking about pipeline gas, because the only way that you can supply people with pipeline gas is by building pipelines. And obviously that takes a lot of planning, engineering, and a huge amount of capital. So it's not something that you can do overnight. So unlike the situation with oil, where Russia was able to pivot and start selling large quantities to China and India, because it could just load that oil onto different ships and send it to different destinations. With pipeline gas, you can't do that because it's gas. You can't put it onto ships unless you convert it into a liquid form. And in order to do that, you need to have huge processing plants because it's not easy. You have to do this under immense pressure. Now, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent application of the sanctions, there has been a huge increase in global demand for liquefied natural gas because most countries in Europe have had to turn to liquefied natural gas because they're now buying from countries such as the USA, Qatar and Norway. And in the same way, it's very difficult for all those countries to be able to construct pipelines. So the easiest way of getting all of that product to those countries is to send it in a liquefied form. This chart shows the countries with the largest liquefied natural gas export capacity in operation as of October 2023. And as you can see, the country with the largest LNG export facilities is the United States, with around 93 million metric tons per year. closely followed by Australia with around 88 million metric tonnes, and Qatar with 77 million. And interestingly, Russia comes in at number 4 on this list and only has 31 million tonnes of capacity. When you compare that to Russia's natural gas reserves, where it has around 24% of the global supply, which is around 5 times the amount that the USA has, and Australia isn't even in the top 10 when it comes to global reserves, you can see that Russia really hasn't been focusing in on LNG historically because of the fact that it was very easy to be able to sell all of that gas through the pipelines. And it's now suffering as a result of that because it simply doesn't have the infrastructure in place to be able to convert the gas that's now sitting under the ground, not being sold into Europe, into LNG, which it then can export globally. And just to finish off this list, Algeria is the world's 5th largest exporter of LNG, followed by Indonesia, Nigeria, Malaysia, Egypt, and Trinidad and Tobago. If we now have a look at the revenue that Russia has been earning from LNG, in January 2022, so before the war in Ukraine started, Russia was earning around $96 million every single day from the export of LNG, which on an annualized basis equated to around $35 billion. Following the invasion of Ukraine, the price of LNG spiked, and in April 22, Russia was earning around $120 million per day from LNG sales, which equates to around $44 billion on an annualized basis. However, today, despite the huge increase in global demand for LNG, Russia's revenue from LNG sales is down to around $36 million per day, which is around 3 times lower than it was before the war started and almost 4 times lower than the peak after the war commenced. And the annual revenue that Russia is earning from the sale of its LNG products is currently $13 billion, which is $22 billion less than it was before the war started, and $31 billion less than it was earning at the peak of the market. The impact of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia has been absolutely devastating on its gas business. As we've seen, the pipeline gas sales have cratered, and Russia simply doesn't have enough infrastructure to be able to convert that natural gas into a liquefied form in order to export it. So Russia is now trying to ramp up its LNG capacity. And it started a project which is located in the Arctic Circle called Arctic LNG 2. And in order to finance that project, it's got on board partners from China, Japan, and France. Now, the project itself is estimated to have a build cost of around $10 billion, and that's being part financed by all of these partners. Now, France has got a 10% stake. There are 2 Chinese companies that each have another 10% stake, so that's 30% in total, and a Japanese company also holds 10%, with the Russian company Novatek holding the balance of 60%. And the arrangement that's been agreed is that all of these parties will input their portion of the build costs, and in exchange for that, they will be given a percentage of the export values. So basically, the 40% that's being financed by China, Japan, and France will be exchanged for 40% of all of the gas exports. So this is a long-term arrangement that's been put in place so that these investors can benefit from long-term demand for LNG. However, there is now a major spanner in the works because in December 2023, the USA sanctioned this development. And as a direct result of those sanctions, all of the foreign investment partners have now pulled out. They've all frozen their involvement in the deal. Pardon the pun there, please, because we're talking about the Arctic Circle here, where obviously there's a lot of ice. But that's not the only problem that Arctic LNG 2 is encountering, because this is located in an area where you need specialist ships that can actually get to the facility and be able to take that gas away. And these are called icebreakers, and they have double hulls that are designed to be able to break through ice that is over 6 feet thick. So obviously that's quite extreme conditions. But there aren't enough of these icebreakers globally to be able to pick up the capacity that Arctic 2 LNG was due to deliver. And so Russia has had to order more of these ships. But unfortunately, from the project's point of view, 3 of those ships were being built by Sovcomflot, Russia's largest tanker fleet. And that business itself was recently sanctioned by the USA. And as a result of those sanctions, those ships are no longer being built. Sovcomflot has said that it can't deliver them because it's in a world of pain because it's suffering financially as a result of the sanctions that have been applied against the company. As I talked about in recent videos, India has now stopped taking any deliveries that are being delivered on Sovcomflot fleets. And so the business is struggling financially and simply doesn't have the money to be able to build these icebreakers. So the development is now in difficulty as a result of the fact that it's lost its business partners, and it's also lost a way of actually transporting the LNG if it was to produce it. And then just to add a further nail in the coffin for this development, Novatek, which is running Arctic LNG, has had to issue force majeure notices to all of the customers that it signed up delivery deals with to buy the LNG. Over the last 2 years, Novatek has run around signing up major supply deals with companies based in China and India to buy this LNG. But unfortunately, it's now unable to deliver under all of those contracts. And a force majeure clause is basically a get out of jail clause in any contract that relates to unforeseen circumstances over which you have no control. So they're often called an act of God or something like that. And Novatek has decided that because of what's happening with regards to the lack of investment and also the lack of ships that are available to it, it's calling it a force majeure and has now said to those customers, we're really sorry, but we're not going to be able to deliver that LNG after all. And obviously, this is going to be a devastating blow from Novatek's point of view because those customers will now have to find alternative sources. And it's likely that even if Novatek does manage to find the money to complete the build of this facility, and if it did manage to find ships, which is very unlikely, to be able to collect the LNG, it won't have any customers because those customers have now gone elsewhere. So this is a categorical disaster from both Novatek and Russia's point of view. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's happening with natural gas is really interesting. As we talked about earlier in the video, prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, natural gas was actually Russia's second largest form of income after oil. This was a significant amount of revenue that Russia was earning each year, over $100 billion in a normal market, but actually around $150 billion when prices started to rise after the invasion of Ukraine was being earned by Russia from the sale of its pipeline gas. And that was easy money because those pipelines had been constructed, they were operating very nicely. All Russia had to do was feed the gas out of the ground into those pipes, and it just made its way to all of those countries who were paying happily for it. However, because of the invasion of Ukraine, all of those countries said, we no longer want to buy it. And just to make things worse, the pipelines that ran under the Baltic Sea, called the Nord Stream pipelines, both exploded as a result of some sort of sabotage. We still haven't got to the bottom of who was behind that. So as a result of all of those actions, Russia lost the vast majority of that income. Now, unlike oil, the only other way of selling pipeline gas is to convert it into liquefied form and then put it onto ships. But as we've talked about in today's video, that isn't as easy as it sounds because you need to build a plant that can manage all of that volume. And these plants are firstly quite complicated, secondly very expensive, around $10 billion each to build. And thirdly, one of the biggest problems that Russia has is that a lot of its gas supplies are sitting in very cold areas in the Arctic Circle. So you've got design and build problems with the facility itself. And then you've also got transportation problems because the ships have to be able to get through all of the ice that forms in the ocean during the cold period. So these icebreaker ships. And there just aren't enough of those globally to be able to cope with the increase in demand. And that's one of the problems that Russia is now facing. Obviously, countries like Qatar and the USA are not facing the same problems because they're not sitting in the Arctic Circle. They don't have to have their ships going and breaking 6 feet of ice every time they want to make a pickup or a delivery. So Russia has some real big logistical problems. And one of the other issues that it's now facing is that the USA has identified this pivot into LNG and has now sanctioned the new development. And as a result of those sanctions, the business partners that Russia had signed up with, 2 from China, 1 from Japan, and 1 from France, have all stepped back and said they no longer want to be involved. They're not going to put any more money into the facility, and therefore that's caused Russia a major problem from a capital point of view, but also Russia's now struggling from the fact that it's had to tell all of its customers that it's been unable to deliver that LNG, and as a result of that, it's lost its buyers. So Russia is in a world of pain right now because it's lost all of its pipeline sales, around $100 billion of lost revenue. It's also struggling to be able to convert the gas into LNG because that's a major problem. It's very difficult to be able to do that. And so it's a very difficult situation for Russia to fix. So the overall summary of today's video is that Russia has lost a huge amount of revenue as a result of the war in Ukraine. It's very, very difficult to be able to convert that gas into a liquefied form, to be able to export it without a huge amount of investment and design and ability. And Russia simply doesn't have the support globally to be able to do that. So Russia has lost this revenue for the foreseeable future, not just for the next 3 to 6 months, potentially the next 3 to 5 years. And the world is moving on. A lot of countries are moving into renewable energy, and by the time Russia gets to the point where it can convert that gas into LNG, it may find that nobody wants to buy it. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.